My parents both came over when they were very young. And my mother was brought over when she was 2 years old, which was approximately the year 1900. And my mother never spoke any other language except English. So she was pretty assimilated, and she thought of herself as American. But of course, she came from a traditional Eastern European family. I have no idea, but I think that her childhood wasn't very easy. She was very good looking, but she had a pockmarked face, I guess from childhood pox disease that she had it bad. So she was kind of self-conscious about that. But she went to high school and graduated and went to work. I don't remember what. But then she met my father, who also came from a Middle European family. Also, a large number of siblings. There were 10 of them, although I was told that they were one of 15, that there was 5 of them who had never survived. And also, he was one of the younger of these 10. So I had a lot of cousins on that side also. Another 50 cousins, probably. The most noteworthy incident of my childhood was that when I was 3 years old, we went on this. They took me. My brother wasn't born yet. For a ride. And I was restless in the car. I was in the rear of a sedan. And I probably was trying to get away from my mother because my mother was a somewhat anxious parent. Anyway, I played with the door, and I opened the door, and I flew out of the car. I mean, rolled out of the car. And of course, they had to stop, and I was pretty badly broken up. My body was pretty badly broken up. A lot of broken bones. But I survived. And I was in braces until I went to kindergarten, around 5 years old. So for about 2 years I was in braces. And I vaguely remember walking around in the braces in Bronx Park by the zoo. By the slight remembrance of it. But I recuperated, and I went to school, and I got active, and I was very active, and I compensated for it. But my bone structure is still not normal, and when I came up to be drafted for the Second World War, they decided that I was not eligible because of the damage to my bone structure, which I still have, and I have difficulty walking. I have one leg longer than the other, and I have a twisted pelvis, and I have spinal stenosis. and some crushed vertebrae and so forth. So my bone structure is obviously not normal. But as a child, I paid no attention to it. I just became very active, and I was active with all the other boys, playing with street games and ball and so forth. But the earliest memory I have of the school is about fifth grade, and I must have been 10 or 11 years old. And I experienced early puberty. So that was significant to me. I became interested in girls at a fairly young age, younger than some of the other boys.
Tell us more about that. What did you do?
Pardon?
What did you do?
Well, they had the boys and girls separated in the school. They had the girls sitting on one side of the room and the boys sitting on the other side. So I used to manage to wiggle to sit on the side closest to the girls and got friendly with the girls.
Was there anybody special?
Yeah, there was a girl who I thought was good looking. In those days, that was what was important to me. And her name was Polly Zupnik.
Polly Zupnik.
Yeah, I think Zupnik was it. Yeah. Polly Zupnik, that's what I remember. She was a good-looking girl, and I was interested in her. But she did not particularly respond.
What else were you interested in at that time?
Oh, well, I was very good in school, so, I enjoyed responding to the school work. And I was an early reader, so I would read anything I could get my hands on. But there wasn't too much valuable stuff available, so mostly I read like schoolboy stories like Tom Swift, and I guess I read some Mark Twain. I guess I read Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. And then I found the romance novels were popular at the time. So older people had romance novels around, and I found them, and I read them. Anthony Adverse, I think, was one, and historical novels. I forget who wrote Anthony Adverse, but it was successful. And then there were, of course, these cheap paperback books, early paperback books, which were like little pamphlets, which were sort of a mixture of Wild West stories and comics. I don't remember any of them, but I used to read them.
How much did they cost? Do you remember?
I don't remember. However much they cost, I didn't buy them because we had very little money. Because that's the story of my father. My father came over. They brought him over with two older sisters. They were teenagers, but he was only 12 years old. And they came over from a farm near the Baltic Sea. And apparently, they were fairly prosperous on their farm. because I've seen some recent pictures of it, and it was pretty impressive. And my father was only 12 years old, but he had already been working at the farm since he was a young boy. And his job was driving a cart with milk barrels into town. So they brought him over here in the hold of a ship. You know, it took a month to get here. And the day after he arrived, he went to work at 12 years old. And of course, what he did was get a job delivering milk to the tenements. And he delivered milk. In those days, they used to bring the milk bottles right up to the door and put it down. And that's what he did. He brought the milk bottles up to the door. 12 years old. And he was determined to be an American, to assimilate. I mean, so he knew Russian and Hebrew and Yiddish, but he never spoke another word of that. He just spoke English. He learned English, and he went to night school. So he was up early in the morning delivering the milk, and he was going to work to high school at night. And he did pretty well. But the family didn't have much money, obviously. So how he started, I don't know. But he got into the diamond business. And he went to school and learned how to cut diamonds. So he started as a diamond cutter in the downtown diamond neighborhood in Manhattan. And the diamond cutters got paid for what they did. So he made quite a bit of money, but then the Depression hit. And when the Depression hit, he lost what he had. And he didn't get any work. So he started to sell diamonds on the street. And there was a lot of street peddlers selling diamonds in those days. So he was a diamond merchant. But he was not a very clever, shrewd type of man. I mean, he didn't have these he didn't have these shrewdness talents that it took to really do well. So he never did very well, but he did well enough to keep us going and to move from the East Bronx to the West Bronx, as I told you. So basically that's where I grew up, in the West Bronx. So one day, for some reason or other, I was playing in the street, and I threw some pebbles up, and I broke one of the windows in the school.
Uh-oh.
So,
Did you get caught?
So I got caught, and they came out, and they dragged me in, and I said, I was with my little brother, so I said, I didn't do it, he did it. So I say, that's ridiculous, he's too little, he didn't do it, you did it. So then they called my parents in to speak to the principal. So I had a disciplinary session with the principal and my parents.
How did your parents discipline you?
Pardon?
How did your parents discipline you?
No, they just talked to me about it, but they were pretty upset, and I was upset, but they didn't do anything. I mean, they just said, don't do it again. I said, well, it was just a one-time thing. Usually throwing a ball around. I don't know why it happened to be pebbles. But anyway, I remember being mortified by that a little bit. But the point is that I was a bit overactive. That's what I was trying. The point that I'm trying to make it, that there was an energy there that wasn't too well channeled. At that time, Bronx High School of Science had just begun. And that was also for gifted children, but it was a scientific rather than a humanistic education. So I wasn't really interested in that. But it was a default choice. So I went to the Bronx High School of Science. I mean, I graduated from grammar school early, and I went to the High School of Science. And it was already beginning to seem like education was the way to go for us. Mm-hmm. But I still had this physical development that was going on. And there was only boys in the school at the time. There were no girls. So I was a little bit frustrated by the inability to have any girlfriends.
So how did you meet girls?
Pardon?
How did you meet girls?
Well, I didn't. I had no way to meet any girls. So I had this sense of frustration about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, how about next step, high school?
Pardon?
So the high school, well, how about college then? Where'd you go to
Oh,
college?
yeah, so that's the point. So I was very eager to get out of there and go to college, because then I knew I would meet some girls. So I accelerated. I moved through fast, and I graduated in 3 years at the age of 16. I got very high grades, and even in the science subjects, although I wasn't interested. And then it was a question of what college to go to. In those days, you were a Jewish kid. You never even thought of Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. It was understood you wouldn't get in. That's what we thought, that you don't get in. You don't get in because you're Jewish, and also because I guess it was a question of money too. Didn't have enough money. So I mean, I should have gone to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, but I didn't. So I tried to figure out where to go. And somehow I came up with the idea of the University of Wisconsin, because I heard that the University of Wisconsin was a good school someplace. And also, in my mind, that it was in the Northwest. It was like, my concept of the United States was that Wisconsin was the Northwest, but actually it's only halfway, 1/3 away, 1/3 across the country. It's near Chicago, but in my mind, it was the furthermost place I could go to, because I wanted to get away from New York. That's it. How come I wanted to get away from New York? I don't know, because I felt it was too congested and too limited. And mostly, I guess, my experience of it was that it was too urban. I wanted to get away where I could see some trees, and Wisconsin was famous for that. And also, it had a fabulous campus, well-known campus in Madison, Wisconsin. It's beautiful. It's in the middle of a lake country. There's 4 lakes around, and it is very physically beautiful. So I picked it, and that's where I went. And it also had a reputation for being very progressive, which at that time it was. Wisconsin was a progressive state at that time. So So that's where I went. But, oh, and I got a scholarship. That's another reason, because I got a scholarship. But I didn't remember applying many places.
Great. What was your major?
Well, that's the other thing. So then I went, so then there was a question. Now we're talking about 1941, 42. I was 16 years old. And the war was on. I think the war started in 1941, Second World War. And my cousins were all going to the war. And then there was a question of my going, because I was going to be 18. So they said, so I was told, look, if you don't want to be drafted, you got to take chemical engineering, because those are the people who get deferred. Chemical engineering. I said, chemical engineering. I said, I'm not interested in engineering, and I'm not much interested in chemistry either. So they said, but that's what you got to major in. So I said, okay, I'll major in that.
Oh dear.
So I took the special advanced chemistry course they had for people who were going to be chemical engineers. And it was like a repeat of my high school chemistry, only more detail and more problems, more detailed problems, and I hated it. I said, it's ridiculous. I know all this stuff already. Why should I do this? So that's what you have to do. And then there were other things. I mean, there was money. So I went to work as a busboy in a campus soda grill. And then they kind of exploited me a little bit there. And then there was girls.
That's the part I'm waiting for.
So I left the campus soda grill from being a busboy, and I went to the girls' sorority house to be a busboy there. And I worked my way up from a busboy to dishwasher. So I was a dishwasher in the girls' sorority house, and all the girls used to come back and talk to me while I was washing the dishes. And that was great. And then I bought a canoe, and I used to take them out on the lake in the canoe, and I was living like I thought was a luxurious life. Before that, I had rented an apartment, not an apartment, but a room in a boarding house. First got there. And in the boarding house, it was run by an Irish lady. And she had a very pretty daughter. So I was interested in the daughter. But then there were a couple of other guys who were from Wisconsin. Two brothers. Melli, Melli, their name was. Joe Melli and Jim Melli. They were from Kenosha, which is where Senator Ryan is from, Kenosha, Wisconsin, which was a kind of an immigrant area. They were from Italian immigrant family. And they were living in this house. So they told me this landlady didn't like me. I said, why doesn't she like me? She said, she doesn't like you because you're interested in her daughter. So I said, well, what's wrong with that? So they said, she doesn't want you to be interested in her daughter because she says you're a Jew from New York.
Oh. And what kind of reputation is that?
Yeah, I said, what? I say, that's unbelievable. They said, no, that's what they told me. They said, you don't know. People around here are prejudiced. This is Wisconsin. I said, well, I'm beginning to get the idea. Meanwhile, my cousin got killed in the Philippines. And I went up for the draft, and I wanted to go, but I got rejected because of my injuries.
How come you wanted to go?
Well, I wanted to go because I wanted to go fight Hitler. And also the Japanese had been portrayed as monsters. And my cousin got killed in Guadalcanal. So, anyway, so I got rejected, and I told all my friends, look, I'm not in. I don't have to be in school. I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm gonna go see the world, the United States. So I had read John Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath. And I got to San Francisco when the war was over. And I was walking down Market Street, and I saw this booth where these soldiers were coming in, making records and sending them home to their parents. And there was a piano in there. So I walked in, and I sat down, and I said, you mind if I play the piano? So, no, they said, go ahead. So I played the piano, and I knew how to play the piano. I had taken piano lessons. So they said, you want a job? I said, well, yeah, sure. What kind of a job? They said, the boys come in and they make records. They like to sing. Send it home. You can accompany them on the piano, and we'll pay you for it. I said, that's great. So I'll do that. So I said, fine. So I had a job in California, playing the piano. And then the United Nations was meeting for the first time in San Francisco. They were having their opening meeting. And Truman came down to address them, President Truman. And he was coming down Market Street right past the place where I was working. So I got up with the microphone and I made a recording of Truman arriving in San Francisco to address the United Nations. And I sent the recording home to my parents. So they were thrilled to receive it. And they had it for a long time. And they gave it to me in some place. I still have it, probably. But anyway, I didn't feel like staying there. I was staying in the YMCA. So I didn't feel like staying there, so I went back. So I started going back, and I went back through Texas. And in Texas, I got into a railroad car and was riding the rails outside of Houston. And in the boxcar, I met another couple of guys who were doing the same thing. But they were Texans, not New Yorkers.
So what were Texans like?
So I got friendly with them. And then we all went to sleep. And the next thing I knew, they were pounding on me. And they knocked me out. And when I came to, they had taken all my stuff, including my pants. They left me lying there in the car without anything. Well, I mean, they didn't take my undershorts. They just took the... So I waited until the next stop and got off. And I made my way to a gas station. And I told the people there what happened. And they were pretty nice. And they found a pair of khaki pants for me. And they gave it to me, and I went on my way. But I had had enough, so I went back to Wisconsin.
And you graduated from there?
No, I just sort of went back and pulled myself together and decided that it was not for me. And I gave up my apartment. I sold the canoe and I left. And I came to New York.
The city or back to your parents?
No, I came to the city, and of course I came to my parents first. But then I went and I rented an apartment. I mean, not apartment. I rented a room on 87th Street right off of Central Park West for, I think, $15 or $10 a week. It was a nice room. It was in the brownstone, right off of the park.
Incredible.
And I got my father to agree to pay for it.
And what year would you say this is now?
This was 1945.
Okay.
I was 19 years old.
Did you go back to university in New York?
Well, see, then I had met these interesting group of people in Wisconsin. Well, now some of them were in New York. I studied some Marxism, and I became interested in leftist politics. And I was floating around with these people who were like borderline leftists. But intellectually, they weren't members of the Communist Party or anything. It was all a kind of intellectual flirtation. And then I began to be interested in that. And then I saw that while they had these intellectual ideals, the behavior was questionable. I mean, the behavior was just as roguish, as the others that I had been seeing since I was a boy. People who professed some things but tended to be primitive in their behavior. So I said it doesn't match. There's not a match between the philosophy that they propound and their behavior. I said there's something wrong with it. I said, and I made a mistake to leave school because I really don't know enough. So I'm going to go back to school and study philosophy. Because there's something wrong with this Marxism stuff. And I knew what was wrong with it. I mean, I had a feeling for a lot of the criticism that had came down on this Marxism. and Stalinism and the whole political arena. So that's what I did. I registered at Columbia, and I mean, I got in it very easy, and then I started going to Columbia. But then Virginia came. Though I continued then to go to graduate school after I got the degree. And then I took some courses at the Union Theological Seminary. That's another story. But anyway, I'm in the graduate school, and the incoming class of graduate students were having a reception. Virginia had been at Yale Graduate School, studying with some pretty high-powered people in the English department. Wimsott was one of them, and she was extremely intelligent and well-informed. I mean, she was the most intelligent woman I had met up until that point.
But hang on a second, I remember you telling me something. Go back to that very first meeting and why you went to talk to her.
Oh, she was very good looking. That was what I was first attracted to, how good looking she was. But turns out that she was also very intelligent and well informed. And I responded to her in a way that was very forceful because, you know, I mean, it was the first time I had met some woman who was that intelligent. And that, not only that intelligent, but that well-read, well-informed. So, we got involved, and we got very intimate, and by that time I had rented an apartment on 76th Street, East 76th Street. So we were living together, and then her mother came and didn't like the fact that we were living together, so she complained about it. So Virginia's parents started insisting that we get married, which we did. So.
Did you have a traditional kind of wedding?
Pardon?
Did you have a traditional kind of wedding?
No, we eloped. We just went to Connecticut where a former friend of mine from Wisconsin was living with his wife. And I guess they got somebody to come over and perform the ceremony. And we got the ceremony, and then we went back to her mother and father. And we said we got married.
And where was
And her father got angry and said, "Get out of my house." So we left. We calmed down eventually. Yeah, it was completely intimate and completely good, and that seemed natural, and we had this lot in common because she had come from this also a limited background, and she had gone far with her education, and we had a lot in common in terms of interests. And I was studying this American version of British philosophy at Columbia, which was called analytic philosophy at the time, logical positivism. It was very science-oriented. And as I told you, I had my questions about the limitations of science all the way back in high school. So I knew that there was another way of looking at things, and I knew I had found out a little bit about European philosophy. And these two guys at Union Theological Seminary were experts. One of them was extremely famous and extremely well formed in philosophy. I mean, he was a real theologian. His name was Paul Tillich. He was extremely famous at the time. And he was a very remarkable human being in terms of quality of personhood. And I had already been interested in the quality of personhood since I was a child. That was all my disappointments because I ran into people who didn't meet my sense of human quality.
Right.
So as I said, I found out about the European-oriented theologians at Union Theological Seminary, and I went over and studied with them. And at that time, they were just hearing about existentialism. And Sartre was becoming the big thing in Europe. So I went over there, and they introduced me to Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, and I became interested in that side of philosophy. So, as I said, they told me that if that was what I was interested in, I had to go to Europe. But meanwhile, I had found a beautiful apartment on Riverside Drive in 136th Street, right north of the Riverside Church, and right over a bridge in Harlem that went to Columbia at one end. And it was a beautiful 8-room apartment facing the river. And Virginia and I moved into it from where she had joined me on East 76th Street. But they kept telling me at Union Theological I had to go to Europe. Anyway, Virginia responded to the idea. She liked the idea also. And, she thought we were only gone for a short time. So we were taking time out from our graduate work. And she thought that there was a lot for her to get out of it. So we went. On a boat. In those days, not many people flew. You took a boat. Forget the name of the boat, but it'll come back to me. Anyway, it was a nice little boat. I think it was a Greek boat. It wasn't American. It was a nice little boat. It had a nice dining room, and there were nice young people working on it, and we had a nice trip. I think it took about 7-8 days to get there. It was a little rocky one time, but that's all. And we arrived in Le Havre, which is north of France. With a little suitcases, not much stuff we didn't take. And we had no idea how we were going to get any further or where we were going. But we both knew a little French, so we managed. And then I guess we took the train. Well, we took the train to Paris. Gare du Nord. Came in the Northern Station. And from there, we just walked through Montmartre down to the Champs-Élysées, which was central, and down to the student quarter. It was called Quartier Latin, Latin Quarter, for some reason. I guess originally the students studied Latin. And that was the hub of all the intellectual activity at the time, anyway.
What year was this?
Pardon?
What year was this?
This was 1952. 1952. So it was only 7 years after the end of the war. So they were still, recovering from the war. And we went, and right away we found a little room in a maid's quarter. They had these apartment houses that had maids' quarters on the top floor, 5th floor up. They had little rooms that they had for the maids in the old days. So we went there and walked up, and I don't know how we found it, but someone must have told us. I don't remember what street it was, but it was right near the Seine, right near the river, and right near the museum, the Louvre. So it was right in the center of things.
Nice location.
Yeah, it was a very good location. And it was nice. Had a very nice view because it was up on the 5th floor. So it had a nice, wide open view. But it was a tiny room. Anyway, that's where we went. And it was 350 francs a month, which was $1. That was you would get 350 francs for $1.
You had plenty of money for a cappuccino and
right, plenty of
croissant.
money. That's right. So we were thrilled. It was like tremendous, terrific. But it was a very tiny room, and it was up 5 flights.
I've got a question, Sheldon. It sounds like, I think from what you've said and Regina said, you had an understanding that you could have relationships with other people. Did you, or did you not talk about it?
It was not an understanding, but that was what was happening. But, we had no understanding about it. It just happened. She also had boyfriends in Switzerland, which I only found out later. But, you see, the culture at the time, that was commonplace. This was now, it was the 50s. And the sexual revolution was already happening. Was not only already, it was happening. And all these American guys were promiscuous. That was one of the things she didn't like. Compared to me, they were like playboys. I was not that. I just got involved with some girls, but, they were really compulsive about it. It was a game that they were all in.
Didn't you get to know Sartre?
Yeah, when I was in Paris, Café Flore.
That's famous.
Flore.
Mm-hmm.
And Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir used to go there. It was they had a big restaurant in the back, and I used to go there to eat. Now, how did met them. Oh, I think, I think I just went over and introduced myself. I just went over and sat down and introduced myself. I mean, went over and introduced myself, and they invited me to sit down. Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre were sitting eating. And at that time, this was 1953, January, I think. Beckett had written Waiting for Godot. And of course, he was influenced by the whole development of existentialism. And what was bigger than existentialism at the time was the théâtre the absurd, UNESCO. And Beckett was influenced by that as well as existentialism. And he wrote Waiting for Godot, on the Tendon Godot. And it played at a theater not far from my apartment. It was like off-Broadway, you know, off-Broadway. It was not in the theater section. It was just a little alternative theater. I forget the name, but that'll come back to me also. And so I went to the opening production of On Tendon Godot, and there were only about 10 people there. The place was empty. And it got very bad reviews in the French press. But I could see that it was really very, very good. It was, I mean, I responded to it and I took it seriously. So that's how I introduced myself to Sartre and de Beauvoir. I told them that I had seen this play by Beckett, and that I thought it was in the spirit of his point of view and his working. And he said, yes, but, you know, and he had his criticisms. And then he started talking. And he didn't stop. He was a compulsive talker. So he just talked and talked and talked. And she tried to get a word in edgewise, but no, there was no way that she could get a word in edgewise. He just went on and on and on. And I didn't get a word in edgewise either. He just ranted and ranted. So, I mean, I just sat and listened, and I didn't understand everything he was saying, but I did understand most of it. And then after about an hour, I left. So I didn't even think anything of it. I mean, he wasn't so famous at the time, you know. It was 1953. So anyway, the point is that Virginia came back to the States for her father's death and funeral, and she didn't want to return. So I got very upset. Very upset. I mean, and then one of my college roommates came over with his wife to visit, and they visited me. And I just remember that they were upset how upset I was. Virginia went back and resumed some connection to Columbia, yes. But then, 1961, I got a telegram from the office that my mother had contacted the office, and my father was very ill. So, I mean, I knew what that meant. You know, it meant they were very ill. It meant he was going. I had hurt my back when I began sending books back to the States. I began loading them up, and I hurt my back bad, so I could hardly move. So I had to go to the hospital. And the German hospitals, again, it was free and they were remarkably good. Not only that, but not only were they technologically good, but they were also holistically oriented, naturalistically oriented. So I had kidney stones, and I went to a German hospital for the pain and the kidney stones. And the doctor said, go up to the roof and jump down the stairs all the way to the bottom floor. I said, really? He said, yeah, you'll shake them loose. And it worked.
It worked?
It worked. I went up to the roof and started hopping down the stairs. And I passed the stones.
Amazing.
So he said, that's naturalistic medicine. Tradition. You know, and I had other experiences like that too. Anyway, so I was now in the German hospital with my back problem, and they had me sleeping on the floor. And it was getting better, sleeping on the floor. I got on the plane, and I stood all the way from Frankfurt to New York on the plane because I couldn't sit down. And Virginia met me at the airport, and she drove me right over to, I don't know where she got the car. Anyway, she got a car. She drove me right over to the airport, to my mother's apartment, I guess. And I dropped my stuff, and then I went right to the hospital. And when I got to the hospital, my father was in a tent, an oxygen tent, and he was breathing heavy, and he recognized me, and he was glad to see me, and he said, "I never been so sick." Which, he had never been so sick. So, I mean, apparently he had fallen out of the bed, and they took him to the hospital. But he had bronchitis his whole life. So now he had emphysema. And I asked, and of course I was pretty exhausted, so I asked the doctor that was he going to last the night. He said, "Yeah, don't worry about it. It'll last the night. Go home and come back tomorrow." So I went back to my mother's apartment, and I sent my brother over there. My brother was staying with my mother. And I went to sleep, and he went over to the hospital. And next thing I knew, he came back and woke me up. And he said by the time he got there, they were wheeling him out. So I got, naturally I was upset. I said, well, the guy told me he was going to last the night. He said, well, he didn't last very long. But anyway, he saw me and he said, "I've never been so sick." Anyway, to make it a little brief, Virginia and I reconciled. She went and stayed with her parents in Flushing, Queens. And I looked for a place to live. And we were reconciled and we got together, and then seemed like very good, so we had Ariel. 1963. And that was pretty amazing, you know, because we had been married already almost 15 years. You know, but I mean, I was still into her. She was still into me. I mean, I had more in common with her than anybody else. And she resumed her connection to Columbia graduate school. And then I went, and I told you before, that was the time I went and made this connection with the people I knew at the new school. And I started teaching at the new school. So I severed my connection with the company and resumed my academic career, I thought.
Well, tell us a bit about the birth of Ariel and how that was and all that.
Yeah, well, it was Christmas time that Virginia and I had a very loving session. Then Ariel was conceived Christmas time, and she was born October 5th, 9 months later, 1963. And I went to be assistant, and it was a very difficult birth. It was a breech. And I wanted to be an assistant, you know, but they drove me out of the delivery room. And I don't know what they did to Virginia. I don't know if they gave her a transfusion or not. But we both got hepatitis C, which is possible that was from that. But anyway, Ariel was born. It was a very long delivery, overnight. I stayed in the hallway.
What hospital was she born?
Columbia Presbyterian.
Okay.
Good hospital. And she had a big mole in her head, which we were worried about, but that disappeared. Mm-hmm. But as I say, it was a difficult delivery for Virginia. And but that was it. There was that baby. And she was a beautiful baby. And we were both thrilled to have her. And also, as she developed, you know, turned out to be a very beautiful child. And we were both... Oh, and her mother came to help. So her mother came and stayed in this apartment with us and helped Virginia with the baby. I was now teaching. And it seemed like a nice situation. I was teaching at the new school and I became very popular there because I was teaching this stuff that had been now coming over to the States and people were interested in it.
What were you teaching?
Existentialism, Sartre, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And Virginia had insisted that I was a problem case and that I needed to go to psychology, psychotherapy. And in those days, it was all the rage here, psychoanalysis. So I agreed to go. They didn't have any couples therapy, and there was nothing wrong with her. It was me, according to her. See, all the problems we had were my fault. So I went, and of course I didn't like it, and I didn't like the guy. Lou Ormond. He was a famous New York City psychoanalyst on the Upper West Side. And he said some pretty stupid things to me. Very stupid they were. I mean,
Was he oriented in only one modality?
pardon me?
Was he oriented in only one modality?
Yeah, he was pretty strict psychoanalytic, Freudian.
Okay.
Yeah, he was. My brother, by that time, my brother was in graduate school, psychology, getting his PhD in psychology at Penn State. So he knew this guy and he recommended him. But anyway, I went for a while and I didn't like him. And so I told him I wanted to go somewhere else. So, and of course the main problem was with Virginia. That was what I wanted to work out. So he agreed to send me to a woman who was a specialist in family therapy, Laura Singer. She was actually the president of the American Family Association or something. At that time, it was just beginning. And she was a very nice, attractive person. And she was more eclectic. She was connected to, she also was very politically liberal. She was connected to her husband. Her husband was a well-known left-wing intellectual. I forget his name. And she was connected to the Community Service Society, which is a very liberal organization. Anyway, point is, she had politically liberal ideas, which I had always had anyway. And so I got along nicely with her, and she liked me, I liked her. So I worked with her for a while, and then she decided that her approach was not profound enough for me. So she referred me to a woman from Sweden. Also, I had all this European background. So she referred me to Renee Nell, who was a famous Jungian psychotherapist in the city. By that time, I had become interested in the intellectual background of psychology. I had originally taken a psych course at the University of Wisconsin, so I knew a lot of elementary psychology. But I didn't know too much about the recent developments of Freud and Jung and Adler. But I informed myself. I investigated it and went into it. And by that time, I really knew a lot. So she referred me to Renee Nell, and I got along well with Renee Nell, who was a Jungian, and the Jungians were into, as you know, religion, and of course I knew a lot about religion, and so I took to it, and I became expert in the theory. So meanwhile, I was teaching philosophy at the New School, and a guy I knew, I don't know who he was, I forget who he was. Anyway, there was an opening to teach psychology at Westchester Community College. So a guy I knew the people there, and he said he was going to recommend me. I said, but that's not my field. My field is philosophy. He said, yeah, but you know more than psychology than anybody that they're going to get. So go up there, talk to them. So I went up and talked to them, and they gave me a job, assistant professor of psychology. So I was teaching psychology at Westchester Community College, and I was teaching philosophy at the New School. And then NYU asked me to teach a course, so I was teaching a course at NYU on on British philosophy. So I was still having trouble with my back and I got pain in my shoulder. So I went to a doctor, a German doctor around the corner on 72nd Street, and he had a little mansion on Spuyten Duyvil, which is the northernmost tip of the Bronx, near Manhattan, where Manhattan and the Bronx join up in the 200s, around 220th Street. And he had this old Spanish mansion that was there on the cliff overlooking the Hudson. It was old, and but it was very beautiful, very natural place. So he said, and I told him about my story, and I was getting crowded in the apartment with Virginia and her mother and the baby and me. So he said I should come up, and he's going to give me the whole first floor of the mansion. Well, give it to me, but rent it to me. And I should come up there with the baby. We should come up and rent it. So we did. And it was a very beautiful place. It overlooked the Hudson. There was a big porch outside where we could put Ariel. And there was plenty of room for Ariel. And there was plenty of room for the books and everything. So I came and I put all the books in there. And moved there with Virginia. Well, meanwhile, Virginia had gone back to Columbia, and she was in the Graduate School of Education. I don't know whether she had finished or not. Maybe she had finished already, I don't know. But anyway, the baby was growing up. And that's what happened. The baby grew up there, and I taught at Westchester Community College and drove up there and back to the city to teach at NYU and teaching at a new school. So I was extremely busy again. It was the same story. I hardly ever saw Virginia. She was with her mother and the baby in this place, sort of cut off from everything.
I remember I like the story you told about Ariel and the books and the shelves.
Yeah. So anyway, we're up here, and I'm coming back and forth, and every time I come back, Ariel had pulled all the books off the shelves, and they were all lying all over the floor. And, and that distressed me. I mean, I didn't get angry at Ariel. She was a baby. But I got angry at Virginia because she let her do it. But, she was permissive with her and, whatever. I mean, but it distressed me a lot. Because books have been a very big part of my life. I didn't like them all lying all over the floor. But it was hard to move around. Anyway, Virginia was not into homemaking or housekeeping, And then her mother moved out. So her mother went back to Flushing. And she was there alone with the baby. And I was away all the time. So things got bad between us again. And she wanted to pursue her own career. So I don't remember if she decided to move out or first got a job, but eventually she decided to move out. And I had to give up the place. And I don't know where I went from there. Oh, and I rented a place I rented in a very small room opposite the New School for Social Research, back into a little small room. Oh, and then I helped Virginia get an apartment in Staten Island in a project that they were building over there. I guess middle income housing or something. A nice new place, nice apartment. So I went and got that. And I think mother went and stayed with her some more and took care of Ariel. And I was visiting. And then she she got a job at Ulster Community College, which is in Kingston, near Woodstock. And she decided to move up there.
What year would you say this is?
This was 1966.
Okay.
Ariel was 3 years old. 67. Oh, Ariel was going to, Virginia was in Teachers College. And first she rented a place, a student place right across from Teachers College on 120th Street. And Ariel was there with her and her mother. And Ariel went to kindergarten at Riverside Church, at a kindergarten. Yeah, Riverside Church. Good kindergarten. So Ariel was in kindergarten, and she was living there with her mother and taking courses. And then she got a job at Ulster County Community College. She went and took that job, and I was a little bit appalled because it meant I was not going to be able to see Ariel, which was extremely important to me. I used to go every weekend to Staten Island. So she got this place up there, and then things got to be very difficult. And then she got a lawyer, and I had to get a lawyer, and the lawyers made things worse, a lot worse. And it got to be like warfare, you know. So things were unpleasant. And there were a few very unpleasant incidents. And Ariel was around and saw them. Yeah, so it was very difficult for Ariel. But I thought she was doing okay. But now it turns out that there were things about it that upset her a lot. I didn't even know about. I mean, Virginia is a very strong-willed person and had a lot of her own ideas about how things should be with Ariel. And I didn't have that much input. But Ariel thinks I was more responsible than I really was. So Ariel has a lot of complaints about what went down around that time in our childhood, which is understandable. I mean, it was very difficult. But she did well. I mean, she was a very gifted child, and she was very smart, and turned out to be a very unusually superb person, but I think she's disturbed by some of the stuff that happened. But, so I used to go visiting up in Woodstock, but Virginia made it very difficult. So first I rented a place up near there, near her house, but Ariel used to complain about it, and she would call her mother, or her mother would call, and then she would come and take the child away from the visit. So I talked to my lawyer, and he said, get a place further away. In the 60s, I was teaching philosophy at the New School for Social Research. And I had been influenced by existential philosophy, and I had been in analysis myself. I've been in first psychoanalysis, Freudian, and then family-oriented with Laura Singer. And then she sent me to a Jungian. I was in that for a while. And I became very interested in the development of the psychotherapeutic theories. And so I offered a course at the New School in psychotherapeutic theory. And Renee Nell was my Jungian therapist. So I had some discussions with her, and she pointed out that the development of humanistic psychology and Esalen Institute in California was very much influenced by recent thought in psychotherapy, particularly Fritz Perls and Gestalt psychology, and also Reichianism was pretty popular at the time. So I got interested in all of that, and I began talking about it at the school, and all the kids got interested also, and I got a big following, and then they all wanted to see me. But I didn't have a place for them. I was just living in a single room not far from the school. So I asked the dean if I could see them in the office. He said, maybe a couple of people, but you can't have a regular practice here. One of the people who was interested was a woman who I got involved with, and she looked around for me for a place, and she found a space for me to have an office in Sheridan Square, which was a very nice space, and it was very cheap because it was originally like a basement, semi-basement restaurant. And it had a couple of studio-sized spaces in the basement. And one of them had been used by the fellow who wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X. Alex something, Haley, Alex, well, I don't remember the name. Anyway, he had been in the back room there, and I think that's where he wrote the autobiography of Malcolm X. And then I used to see people there, and all of a sudden I began to have a lot of people coming. So I don't know how, but I got interested in groups. I guess because of the influence of Esalen. Group therapy was becoming popular. And I became interested in that because I had so many people anyway. So I put them into groups. I was running like 2 groups every night, every evening. So that was about...
Did you use one modality over another, or a combination of all, in like
no,
kind of your own?
I just developed my own point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then existential psychotherapy became popular.
What's the definition of existential psychotherapy?
Well, it was influenced by existential philosophy.
Uh-huh. But how do you incorporate the two together?
Well, existential philosophy was really psychologically oriented in the first place, because European thought was very much ensconced in the literary tradition, which was more psychological than scientific. It was much more literary and traditional, classical. And it emphasized human existence. That's why it's called existentialism. Human existence as contrasted to essence. Essence is general theoretical constructs behind science, which was the emphasis in Anglo-American thought, which it still is. I mean, there's that contrast. And then I was interested in Martin Buber, who came out of that European existential tradition. And he wrote a book called I and Thou, based upon the notion of dialogue between human beings, and also between human beings and God, who he conceived of as a thou, not as a thing, but as somehow a person type being. Anyway, it was all very carefully based on neo-Kantian philosophy, which I had been already interested in before I went to Europe, even. So I just picked up on that, and it seemed like an outgrowth of all the things I had been interested in. And basically, I was interested in people. So I began running these groups, and I had like over 100 people in the groups. So also I was having trouble with my visitation with Ariel and her mother. Her mother made it difficult. So this girl I got involved with, her name was Karen, helped me find this office, and then we went upstate for a conference at Lake Minnewaska. There was a psychology conference influenced by Esalen. Those kinds of things were all in the air at the time. So she came up with me, and we stayed in Lake Minnewaska. The hotel there was called the Wild Mere. It's since burned down, but it was a very old hotel from before the Civil War, and it was pretty much still in that style of furnishing, and it had objects in it that were like 100 years old. So it was very charming, but it was also an extraordinarily beautiful place. It still is a very beautiful, unusual place. So we were thrilled by being there. And I said, well, maybe this would be a place where we could look for some place where I could bring Ariel. So I wouldn't have to deal so much with our mother's interferences, which had been recommended by my lawyer anyway. So we left the place and we started driving down the highway, and there was a real estate agent sign. So we drove in and asked him to show us if he had anything. He said, yeah, he had a lot of places. And he had a pack of pictures. He started shuffling the pictures. And then at the bottom, there was a picture of this very rustic-looking cabin. He said, well, you wouldn't be interested in that. Oh, I said, why not? He said, because it's too primitive. He said, well, let's take a look at it. So he took us there, and it was about 20 miles from Lake Minnewaska, and it was on a triangular base towards Woodstock, where Ariel was. So it was about 30 miles from Woodstock and 20 miles from Lake Minnewaska. So we liked that, and it turned out it was a very beautiful place. So when we drove up the driveway, I said in my mind right away, this is it. And so we drove up, and the fellow who owned the place showed us around, and he tried to sell it. He was very high pressure selling it, but I had already decided I was going to buy it. And I had in mind, well, this would be a great place where I could bring people up for weekends. I can have weekend groups, weekend retreats up here. It's perfect for that. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. I bought it and started bringing people up on weekends. In those days, it was very cheap to have a car, and gas was very cheap. So a lot of the people had cars and came up. And so I ran groups up there, and it was popular. So then my cousin said I should set it up as a retreat center and give it a name and incorporate it, and there would be tax advantages. So I said, yeah, that's a good idea. So I gave it the name of Encounter Institute, because Encounter was Martin Buber's idea of human interaction. Human interaction was an encounter. and that was a popular term for groups. They were called encounter groups at Esalen. So I called the place, I called it Encounter Institute, set it up, and I used to bring a lot of people up there for weekends. And I used to run weekend marathons, and then I would arrange to have private sessions, and it got to be very busy.
Can you give me an idea of what the retreats were like and what the groups were like, the format, the subject matter, how you led them?
It was just a regular group of 6 to 8 people who were interacting. That was what they called encounter. They were learning how to interact with one another. I mean, it was the beginning of the what nowadays is called relationship therapy. It was the beginning of an awareness that the essential thing is human relationships. And it was a spin-off from Freudianism, which had been emphasizing past events in a person's life, and encounter emphasized present events, a present mode of dealing with other persons, basically. Bringing them into a natural environment made it all the more likely that they would be relaxed and let go, so to speak. And it happened, and actually people liked it, and some of them even began to come up to help me fix the place up during the week. We didn't have many conflicts. It was a very congenial process that people liked it. They just they enjoyed being there, and getting outside, getting away from New York City was in those days a big thing, because in the '60s had been kind of opened up to the notion of Mother Nature and natural environments and healthier styles of living, and they all responded to that. And mostly they responded to the place. The place was very beautiful. There's a pond, a lot of trees, and I had built a sauna. People used to take a sauna and swim in the pond. It was a prototype of a lot of the kinds of, there's a lot of them now, but a lot of the retreat centers. But I was early on. And of course I was not a guru. There was no Oriental aspect to it. But later on, the yoga and Oriental philosophy persons started these kinds of centers, and now they're all over the place, even up there. Retreat centers, of course, and spas, stuff like that. It's all over the place. But this was in the early '70s, and there weren't that many people doing it at the time.
It sounds like it was mutually nourishing for you and for the people that came up.
Yeah, I found it very satisfying.
What kinds of...
Brian, there was, I wouldn't say it was directive, it was non-directive, but behind it all was my personal my personal orientation towards the significance of amicable human relationships. So that was my point of view, and I had already had those feelings when I was a child. So it was the basic pursuit of my life.
Well, it sounds like it worked very well. You touched the lives of many people. You help people transform.
Yeah, it worked very well, and I did influence a lot of people.
So what do you think is healing for people really?
Pardon?
Based on, what do you think is really healing for people really? Healing, what's healing for people with, supposed mental illness?
Yeah. I mean, what's healing? I mean, it's just, it's just a cliche to say it. What's healing is love. That's what's healing. But, that's a small word. That's a small word with a big meaning. So...
And as a professional, how can you offer that? How can a professional offer that to their clients?
Oh, professionals can offer it by caring. Caring is a form of love. That's what health care means, care. And any physician who knows anything about it knows that that's the most important element in medical attention, care. Psychological aspect of it. Every good physician knows that, despite what they learned in school. It's not mechanical application of some kind of established scientific tradition. And sophisticated laymen know that too. But there is a age-old conflict between religion and science, which is still going on. But sophisticated scientists know that it's a superficial conflict. And sophisticated religious people know that it's a superficial conflict. That the root of religion and the root of science are the same. The basic principles behind all human endeavor has been to establish empathetic relationships between human beings. That goes back to ancient time, prehistoric times. Mm-hmm. The more the archaeologists explore ancient civilizations, the more elements they find of a human impulse towards, I could only call it empathy. Empathy is a word they even use. Mm-hmm. Meaning the capacity of a human being to enter into the concerns of another human being.
I've read some...
That civilization is based upon that.
Were there any particular activities you enjoyed doing with Ariel?
No special. Just being together, that's all. putting the food on the table. She matured very early, and pretty soon she was able to just fend for herself up there. And she still comes up and, basically, Lake Minnewaska is a big thing to her. She goes there all the time. I never influenced her that way, but she discovered it herself. And there's the reservoir. She likes to ride a bike around the reservoir. She has a good basic love of nature. So to her it meant a lot physically to be able to be there. And then she met a lot of people. And of course, they were people who were exploring themselves, so they were amenable to being with a child.
Just a general question: what things people have given you most joy in your life?
The most joy I got was from Ariel. Still, she was a beautiful child, and she turned out to be a beautiful person. And that's very satisfying to me, very pleasing to me. I guess I tend to exaggerate it, but
What do you admire most about her?
I think she has this feeling that I'm talking about. She has a feeling for other people that's very deep and profound and caring. She's a very caring person. And also she's extremely intelligent. But that's the main thing. Beneath it all, she has a very caring quality. And she expresses it, and she does things along those lines.
Do you enjoy speaking to her about all of these types of topics that you've explored?
I don't discuss it with her.
Oh, you don't?
Oh, we don't have discussions. We just with each other, that's all. I know how she feels. She knows how I feel. My love for her is profound, and she cares about me. But I feel like she's the best thing that ever happened to me. She's the best thing in my life, even now. Although I don't see much of her. But I went through this Hurricane Irene 2 years ago. It was horrendous what damage it did upstate, tremendous, very shocking, traumatic damages. And she came up this summer, and she took care of it all. It was amazing what she did. Amazing. She took care of the guys who were doing the construction. Amazing. She even got in and worked the machines. So I was very impressed, because She's extremely competent. I mean, it's not just that she's a caring person. She's extremely competent. I don't believe in any of the superstitious, otherworldly aspects of religion. I don't believe in any of that stuff. I mean, I believe that this is the world we live in. There is one world, and we make the best of it. When we die, we die, and then we're gone, except possibly in the memory of some people.